Hello, everybody, and welcome into another episode of the Couch GMs podcast. It is Thursday, September 19th, 2024. I'm your host, George Kerth, joined by the one and only Cody Roadcap. Cody, week 3 coming up. Are you dealing with injuries as much as the rest of us are?
If I said no, you'd be really concerned, I feel like. So
Yeah, that's true.
definitely dealing with injuries. I'm glad to have you back. You missed the Monday show.
Yep.
Rocked out with Marcus. That was fun. But yeah, it's always good talking ball with you.
Thank you to Marcus for filling in. I think you guys did a fantastic job on Monday without me, but I missed it. That's why I had to check in and drop a comment. So you guys all should as well. Drop comments in there. We'll answer any questions that you guys drop in there as the show goes on. Make sure also you follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok at the Couch GMs to get even more than you do from the show, and to drop your DMs and or your questions in our DMs when we're not live on Mondays and Thursdays at 6:30. But Cody, why don't we just start with the show by sit back, relax, and chat.
All right, George. I'm going to steal the hosting a little bit real quick just because I missed it from Monday, but you weren't here. So I want to give you one chance to get anything off your chest, maybe defend something that was said on the podcast, give a little bit of feedback, give you your little bit of moment to react to week 2 before we jump into week 3.
Now, are we talking about a certain Monday night game, or are we talking about the fact that I'm still right about the New Orleans Saints being the better team in the NFC South? Because I still think that's true.
Hey, that is up to you. And again, I am not letting you ride this all season. You said I'm picking the Saints just because. That's no, like, you couldn't give a reason. You're just like, yeah, they're gonna do something weird and win it somehow. You're not riding the coattails on that prediction, buddy.
Hey, it's all good. I mean, last week was a roller coaster. I guess some of the highlights that I saw that I would have talked about, the Chiefs winning on that penalty that was questionable, but it was a good game there. The Cardinals look legit. As much as the Rams are hurt, and that's probably part of it, the Cardinals look legit. Eagles offense still has some struggles in their defense as well. And like I said, the Saints also look legit, which is impressive.
For sure, for sure. So let's turn the page. We are now officially on to week 3. I wanted to give you your opportunity there. And you talked about injuries at the top. I know we're going to go through a lot of these games that are coming up, breaking down some of the key moments and key players that could be missing. And if you've got fantasy questions and you're watching live, make sure to drop them. We'll answer them live on the show. Or if you're listening to the podcast on your normal podcast platforms, shoot us up with a DM at the Couch GMs. But George, there was so much going on, so many injuries. Is there one specific injury that sticks out to you?
I one specific injury or one specific team's injuries?
Okay.
Because my answer, I feel like, has to be the 49ers if I can like answer a team, because they went from one of the most stacked teams in the league to now like Kittle dealing with a hamstring, CMC obviously an IR, Debo out multiple weeks. It's ridiculous.
You're not wrong. And the team they're playing on Sunday, the not St. Louis, Los Angeles Rams, what a drop that almost was. They're
Nice. What a
just as
throwback.
banged up, if not. And I've started to see some stuff on Twitter, and obviously that's not like, it's not sourced, it's fans talking. Or would you think the Rams would consider trading Matt Stafford at this point? Like, get him to a team that has a chance to win, and like they just kind of like throw it all in. I actually saw one person was like, could you not, it'd have to be like a 3-team trade to work it out, but like get Bryce Young. Carolina's team's dumb. Let him play the year behind Jimmy G, then be in Sean McVay's offense, try to rekindle that. Or because I mean Stafford, he's getting up there in age. He probably does not want to play with that, depleted Rams team all season. He will. I mean, he got a new contract this offseason. So, but just one of your thoughts. Do you think there's any chance by the trade deadline Stafford's moved?
I'm only going to say no, because I mean, there's a lot of still good young talent on that team that I have to think their window's still open for another year or two. If they have Cup coming back and Nakua coming back, there's still a chance they can make a run at the playoffs this year. And they could be one of those teams that we talk about that's like didn't have a great regular season, but they're a legitimate team that can put pressure on the NFC. So I'm thinking no, more for a long-term outlook, and the fact that I don't think Sean McVay wants to throw this thing into rebuild mode.
Yeah, I think so too. But it did make me think, all this retirement speculation, he was going to go out with Aaron Donald. Like
Mhm.
they were he wanted to spend more time with his family and then to come out this year. And obviously, there's no control over injuries. Injuries are a act of nature. There's nothing the team can do about it, but they are decimated, not just at the skill positions for fantasy, but across the offensive line. Their defense is kind of rebuilding after losing Raheem Morris to the Buccaneers head coaching job. Like the Rams are going through it right now, but the good news is it is week 2 and it is still early and they could turn it around. They get these guys back. There's 7 teams in the playoff. Maybe they can squeeze it in and become one of those dangerous teams. It's not like we haven't seen that before too.
It's very true. And when it comes to this matchup here, the injuries make it super interesting because who's left? We got Ayuk and Jordan Mason on the 49ers side, and then we got Kyron Williams and a bunch of wide receivers who we don't necessarily know who's going to take the lead on the Rams side. So there's still Jordan Whittington, who some people want to be this year's Puka Nakua. We have
Demarcus Robinson.
Marcus Robinson, obviously. Yep, I'm trying to think of Tutu Atwell. Kind of made an appearance last week. He's somebody
Tyler
who
Johnson had that big
here when Cup was out. Tyler Johnson, I know that's somebody that I think we've been willing to be good for a while now, but just
and
like
then
he
Cody Parkinson at
went out
tight
long
end.
term. And
Yeah,
then what was that about tight end?
I said Cody Parkinson, Colby.
Colby Parkinson.
Not
Exactly.
Cody. I'm Cody. Colby.
Hi, Cody.
Hi, Andrew in the chat. I love it. But
Yeah. Hi, Andrew.
yeah, so let's start with that. All those pass catching options eventually, and I was talking a little bit about Marcus that too. Like somebody still has to catch the ball.
Mhm.
So if you have to play a Rams wide receiver this week, which one are you playing?
Get why people are jumping on the Jordan Whittington train. Like I've seen that one pop up a little too much. If I had to guess a safe pick, I would go Demarcus Robinson. He's the guy that proved it the most. I have a weird gut feeling it's going to be Tutu Atwell because he did it last year when Cup was out, when it was him and Nakua basically going off, and he was a fantasy relevant player. He didn't really show up in week 1, but in week 2, I saw an appearance, and that made me remember like there's a chance he might be a McVay guy.
No, I think you're getting confused. Demarcus Robinson was a top fantasy target the last couple weeks of the season last year after Cup went down for good. So I agree. I think the smart play is Demarcus Robinson. He's going to be the guy, but just understand ceilings and floors. Like the Rams pass catchers, they're not going to have high ceilings. It's going to be tough for them to struggle. And you might want to start considering handcuffing some of those guys like a Kyron Williams and pick up a Blake Corum. And we talked about the 49ers, maybe a Jawan Jennings with Debo out, with CMC out, with potentially George Kittle out, or maybe start looking at Jordan Mason's backup for a handcuff and Isaac Arendo. Like there's definitely some names that you might not want to play, but at least for these teams, you expect high outputs. You might want a piece of them on your bench at least.
If I'm not mistaken, I think there might have been another backup injury in the 49ers backfield. I could be wrong. I think you're probably actually right about the handcuff there. It is Isaac Garendo, my bad. But
Is
yeah, like
Patrick Taylor banged up?
at this point, we have to start worrying about bye weeks starting next week. So like you can't really start stacking your bench too much with like handcuffs, but with how this season's been going, I think as we start going forward, handcuffs are going to become a lot more common than we've seen in past years, especially when it comes to wide receiver threes with high upside or especially RB2s.
And not even just this matchup, but like in general, like I feel we talked about it off air, we talked about it in our group chat. Like it feels like injuries are up, and I'm sure I don't have the numbers, and I'm sure they're really not that much different than the years past. But I know personally in our league of record, it was the fastest I've ever filled up my IR spot. Like it was I've already had to drop someone because I had too many people on IR. I had to let go of Hollywood Brown, but he's out for the season, so it's not the end of the world for that one. I mean, hope that he gets back. But like, there's been a lot of players. I know it circulated the all injured lineup last week that somebody you could play in fantasy. There's a lot of injuries that have happened, and they just feel like big names. And even some of the big names, like Justin Jefferson, gets banged up with a quad injury, and it's like, yeah, he's expected to play, but are you concerned? Could the chances of re-injuring Jordan Love, same thing. Like even when it's not these guys missing weeks, like they're dropping out of games. I mean, even Brees Hall, we're going to see him later tonight when we talk about Thursday night game. He dropped out for a little bit. Braylon Allen came on strong, and then they both came back and looked good. It's definitely 2 weeks in. It's one heck of a fantasy season.
And you're probably right. It's probably not up when it comes to the sheer number of injuries. I think it's just the star power that's getting injured right now that makes us feel like it's even worse than usual. But I really don't have the numbers to back that up or not. But there's so many people that, like, normally I'm cool with stashing people on IR like during the draft or right after or whatever it might be. You almost haven't been able to do that this year with some of these guys hitting IR so quick. But I know you mentioned Justin Jefferson. I want to talk a little bit of Texans Vikings because that's a very intriguing matchup since the Vikings have started off so hot. I'm personally not worried about Justin Jefferson. From what I understand, that injury to his quad is more or less a bruise. So I'm sure he's probably going to be good to go. Obviously, he could get it banged up, and that's going to hurt. But it doesn't seem like it's like a muscle, like a tissue injury, anything like that that really could like worsen from playing. So that's actually something that's promising. And I don't think it's going to hurt his output.
Yeah, I think he's good to go. Exactly. He practiced in limited on Wednesday. I believe it was even full. No, it was limited both days. Aaron Jones, another guy, he was limited to full uh, on Thursday. So you can play both of those guys. And this game should be a good game because um, the Texans, they were everyone's darling to start the season, and they started out 2-0. They're doing what they need to do. But are you surprised by how close the Texans games have been? Like, it felt like they barely went on to beat the Bears. It took to the last drive to beat the Colts, essentially. Like, are you concerned? Or are you just like, whatever?
I mean, I'm concerned only a little bit. I think part of it is there's some new pieces in there that are really still having to gel. We forget the fact that Joe Mixon just started there. We actually don't know if he's going to play this week since he's dealing with an ankle injury from a hip drop tackle. And then we also have Stephon Diggs in there new. We all knew that there was a chance that there would be, some growing pains out of CJ Stroud. He's still a young quarterback. He way outperformed expectations in his rookie year. So going into the second year, you have to expect there's going to be a couple of growing pains. But they're a team that's going to gel better as the season goes on. The fact that they've gotten out of there with 2 wins is a bonus. If they end up with 2-3 losses through the first half of the season, they're still tracking on pace to be exactly where we would expect them to be.
Yeah, and since you keep bringing up the Saints, I'm going to start bringing up Nico Collins because that was my guy. You were a Tank Dell guy. Some people were Stephon Diggs guy. Dude is balling out, looking like he's taking another step. Love what we're seeing out of him and that connection from CJ Stroud. Before we move on to another game, did you catch the stat that I dropped on Monday about Sam Darnold and his performances after the first week 3?
No.
All right, so let me pull it up for you real quick. I should have had that prepared before it, but just an interesting fact because we've seen Sam Darnold get strong starts in the season. Think about back in 2021, those Panthers started out 3-0 with Sam Darnold, and then they just fell off a cliff. So since 2021, in the first 3 starts of the season, his PFF passing grade, obviously PFF, grain of salt if you don't believe him, whatever, 85. The rest of the season, 45.3. So what that tells me is if the stats don't lie, he's got 1 good game left, and then it might be time to sell high on Justin Jefferson.
If that is something that continues this year, we'll have to revisit this in like week 5 and 6 just to see. That's absolutely amazing. Like, maybe it's a body wearing down kind of thing because, playing football is tough, but there's not much other than that to explain why that would happen.
Exactly. And speaking of explaining how that would happen, let's move to another game in that early window. Giants Browns. You're probably like, why are you talking about that? One, got to make a quick jab at the Giants for being the first team to score 3 touchdowns and still lose the game without giving up a touchdown, as the Commanders only kicked field goals. But the one thing I do want to talk about with the Giants, and no, it's not Devin Singletary having a better yards per attempt than Saquon Barkley. You can watch both them play. You know which one's the better running back. But Malik Neighbors had a pretty good game against the Commanders. Yes, it's the Commanders, but I feel like his breakout game, so to speak, was kind of overshadowed by Marvin Harrison's big game. But he had 18 targets, 10 catches for 127 yards and a touchdown in week 2. Currently wide receiver 8 in half-point PPR. So the Giants are a mess. Everybody agrees with that. But are you bought in on Malik Neighbors?
I am. And I think it's only because what else is there? Like, I'm not even a fan of Daniel Jones, but somebody's got to do something, and he's way too talented to do nothing. Name me one other wide receiver on their team.
Is Isaiah Hodgins still there? I feel like that's my
Don't
go-to.
think so. I don't know.
He might be a
I
practice
know
squad
of
guy.
Wandale Robinson, which again, like he never really turned out. I mean, Isaiah Hodgins might still be there, but even yet, like we're talking about guys that like, oh yeah, they had a flash in the pan, but they've never been anything relevant.
How about Kenny Galladay? Is he still there? No, I know he's not.
I'm
But
pretty sure Kenny Galladay is working at the Waffle House at this point. I don't know.
yeah, so
But because of that, like it's him and it's Devin Singletary, and that's it on that offense. So I like the fact that they're going to have to feed him targets, and he's talented enough to be able to turn that into something. And it's going to be a very wild ride up and down depending on matchups and how rough it is that week. But he's gonna get his on at least some of the games.
awesome. And then just because we're talking about this game, Browns, like they squeaked by with a win this past week over the Jags, but they still didn't look great. Deshaun Watson still is having issues playing quarterback, which sucks for them. What are your thoughts? Like, is there any Browns that you're willing to play with Njoku still banged up? Or are you kind of just like, all right, we just got to wait for Nick Chubb to come back?
I think we have to wait for Nick Chubb to come back. I don't hate playing Jerome Ford if they would actually like give him the consistent touches. Like last week, they gave Dante Foreman double the amount of touches, but Jerome Ford's sitting here getting 9.1 a touch, and Dante Foreman got 3. I feel like if we can find a situation where Ford actually takes over that job, at least 50-50 or better, he's definitely somebody who you could attempt to play if you needed it. But unfortunately, that's not the world we live in right now. Other than that, it's very ugly. And not touching Amari Cooper, my favorite receiver on that team right now is Jerry Jeudy, and he's not worth playing in fantasy.
Dude, I
Like,
was so ready to clip. I might still try to do it. Amari Cooper, my favorite wide receiver on that team. If I can clip
nope.
that, that'll be right up there with the Chargers. I'm a Chargers fan. So
Because
stay tuned on
I
social media.
hate Amari Cooper. But no, right now the person who's performing the best is Jerry Jeudy, but he's not getting enough work or looks to be relevant in fantasy. So
Also, just so you know, Isaiah Hodgins is on the practice squad. Let's talk about Bears
he's
Colts.
still there, but on the practice squad. Got it.
Gotcha. Bears Colts. Again, another game that's probably not going to be pretty. Both offenses are struggling. 2 young quarterbacks. But the thing that sticks out to me is the Colts have been averaging or giving up an average of 237 rushing yards through the first 2 games. Over 200 yards through 2 games. Wild.
Yes.
Can you play DeAndre Swift? Asking for a friend, but I'm the friend.
You're the friend. I mean, I would have to say probably. Just
I don't really
because
have a
he's been
choice
getting
with injuries, but
volume. He's been getting volume. He's been in some tough matchups. It hasn't been pretty, but if you're saying that there's a team that's given up over 230, was it 237 yards per game on the ground, and DeAndre Swift, even when he's not performing, is getting 14 carries, I could see him getting 70, 80 yards. Very realistically, he could break 100 at that point. I mean, and I don't imagine this game really getting out of hand for the Bears, even though their offense hasn't been fantastic, just because the Colts have been struggling too. The only way I think it's going to hurt DeAndre Swift from having at least a decent game is if the game script flips on him and the Colts get out to a huge lead. And there's nothing that's telling me the Colts can do that as of now.
Yeah, the one thing I did notice, especially in the Texans game, it was Khalil Herbert that got the goal line work and got the end zone versus the Texan last week. So that's the one concern with DeAndre Swift. He's kind of back in that same split that he was when he was in Detroit with him and Jamal Williams. And you saw that season, Jamal Williams had like 19 touchdowns, but Swift was the more efficient runner. And we could see that again. But the Bears, they are slowly coming on. I'm not panicking too much about their other players, whether that's DJ Moore. Keenan Allen's probably out one more week, I would imagine. Rome Odunze, he's not in your lineup yet just because he's battling injury as well. So for me, it's really just DJ Moore and Caleb Williams and DeAndre Swift. Not Caleb Williams, not playing him. I'm playing DeAndre Swift.
Let's play a game of pick your Colts wide receiver.
Okay, Colts wide receiver.
Yeah, so Michael Pittman's been struggling. Is there anybody else there you like? Do you still play Pittman?
Yeah, so this is actually, that's a great question because this Bears defense is actually very good. And it's hard to bench Pittman because you drafted him third, fourth round, but we're in week 2. You got to stop worrying about that draft position and start worrying about people that are going to get you victories in fantasy this past week. And I don't know if I'd play him this week as well, just because he'll be his first game back. But Josh Downs is supposed to make his season debut. He's their slot guy. But all throughout camp and preseason, like that was the guy that Anthony Richardson looked to, targeted to, was kind of his safety blanket. So he's the name that I would watch moving forward. I'd probably still play Pittman this week if I had to. I'd try to find someone else. But I would say Josh Downs going forward. And I also have liked what I've seen out of Adonai Mitchell. He did have a pretty bad drop that would have been about a 30-yard game last week. But that Colts wide receiver room is getting very hard to predict.
Yes, it is. And if I had to go with somebody this week, I think I'm going Alec Pierce because he's been the most effective so far. He actually led the team in targets and receptions and yards last week. But I do like Josh Downs for the long term. So if you have a spot and he is still available, he's a big stash. Maybe not a play this week, but he's a stash.
Cool. Let's talk about you want to talk which Pennsylvania team, East or West? You want to talk about first?
Let's go West first because there's a quarterback situation that's very interesting.
Yeah, so Chargers, Steelers, Chargers, West Coast team coming east at 1 o'clock. Keep that in mind. But Justin Fields is expected to start again. Herbert is banged up. What are your thoughts on Field? I mean, they're 2-0. They've scored 1 touchdown. Like, I don't know how to feel about the Steelers.
I don't think that Russell Wilson would be going out there lighting it up either. But I don't think you can say that you've seen any improvement out of Justin Fields either. If anything, you can say that there might have been improvement in protecting the ball because he hasn't turned the ball over. But in turn, it's been an even less explosive offense than we've seen with Fields in the past. And I can't say he was really lighting up the scoreboard anyway before when he was in Chicago. So if you're going to have a ball control offense and you're not really going to be able to show off what Justin Fields can do with his legs, because it seems like he doesn't quite have the arm talent to be the quarterback we really want him to be, why don't you go to Russell Wilson, who probably at his point in his career can give you a little bit more in a ball control offense than Justin Fields can, who basically just has to play scared if I have to, describe it at this point.
I completely disagree.
Okay.
I would play I think Justin Fields should start the rest of the season. I don't think Justin Fields is great. I think he has definitely passing deficiencies. But I think we're past Russell Wilson being anything sort of a mediocre quarterback. So give me the guy that could still take 170 to the house with his legs versus the guy that, and whatever you have left in Russell Wilson. That's me personally. But I understand your hesitation to want it. It's like, which evil do you want? The guy that's, going to sit back there and throw a bunch of moon balls out of bounds, or the guy that's going to hold the ball and take sacks, but might make a play here or there. So I'll take the younger, more athletic guy in Fields.
It's not been pretty in Pittsburgh when it comes to the offensive side of the ball over the last few years, but that defense is so good that obviously they're going to stay in games. They're still going to win games, and it's not going to be pretty.
Through 2 weeks. All right, let's talk about, we're going to jump around a little bit because, our show will do what we want. Let's talk about the other AFC opponent with the Ravens and the Cowboys, and that's because we got a question from a fan listening, so thanks for that. So last week, he says he flexed Brian Thomas Jr. over Mark Andrews. He was right about that with it being in half-point PPR. Does he continue that week with the Rook this week, or does he go back to Mark? Mark is a flex option, so this is a flex play, double tight end, because he does have Laporta. I know Mark Andrews did have a little bit of a bounce back, still not what you expected for him, but Isaiah likely definitely came down to earth in week 2. Your thoughts on who you're playing between Brian Thomas and Mark Andrews before we get into these games?
I would still go with Brian Thomas. So as much as we keep talking bad about the Browns, it's still a very solid defense. And it was a little bit rough for Brian Thomas, but man, he's got some explosion. He made most of his points on one play, but he's somebody that Trevor Lawrence is going to keep looking to on the deep ball. And I think he's got a lot of upside. When it comes to Mark Andrews, I don't know if he's quite the same fantasy tight end, and especially when we're talking flex, that he has been in the past. And he's going to be completely fine when you need him to fill in for Sam Laporta. But I think I would take the upside of Brian Thomas rather than going with Mark Andrews. At this point in his career, his upside is limited.
Yeah, I definitely understand that one. I would lean Brian Thomas as well. There is some concerns. I mean, he's only seen 4 targets in both of those 2 games, but you mentioned his explosiveness. But at the same point, last week Andrews had 5 after coming off of 2. So it's not like he's that center point focal part of that offense either in
Yeah.
Baltimore. And
If
it
you're going to
wasn't.
tell me that both of them are going to get 4-ish targets, I'm taking Brian Thomas especially.
Yeah, and let's not act like the Ravens were up, but they had to fight through that game. It wasn't like they were on cruise control and they end up losing. So, yeah, Brian Thomas for me, especially because, and we'll talk about this when we get to the Monday night game. Evan Ingram, his status is still up in the air, and they have to figure something out because Christian Kirk wasn't getting targets. Trevor Lawrence has been rough to start the season. I get that, but I still think the high upside and potential big play I like with Brian Thomas. And not that you should ever pick your fantasy lineup like this, but it gets you a guy on Monday Night Football, so you're not out of it until the very end.
I like it. So we were going to talk about Ravens and Cowboys here. So it seems like we're a little bit down on Mark Andrews. Are we still throwing Isaiah Likely out there in a tight end spot because of the upside that he has shown?
If you're in 10 or 12 man leagues, you're probably playing both. At the
Yeah.
tight end specifically, if you were like our guest here or the question here that had Sam Laporta, then I wouldn't play Mark Andrews, but you're probably playing both, and that just goes to show how bad tight ends are. I mean,
Yes.
you don't even have Jake Ferguson anymore for the Cowboys as a potential bucket play, as we like to say here. So I think you're playing them. If for some reason, let's say you're like Marcus, who was on the show Monday, league of record, he drafted Mark Andrews and then handcuffed him with Isaiah Likely looking ahead. If you're in that situation, I would play Isaiah Likely over Mark Andrews.
I would too. I mean, it's hard to tell how this game's going to go. But when it comes to upside between the two, seeing how they've been playing them over the first few weeks, having Isaiah Likely lined up as a slot, a little bit more like a wide receiver, and the fact that they're both getting similar amounts of snaps, I like the upside of Likely better.
Yeah, and then with the Cowboys, really the thing to watch is CeeDee Lamb is a little bit banged up. Mike
Who
McCarthy
isn't?
said it's not that much of a concern. I expect him to still play, still go out there. But if for some reason he doesn't go, for me, it's Jalen Tolbert is the guy to pick up and
Mhm.
play over Brandon Cooks. I think you're starting to see Tolbert overtake the veteran Brandon Cooks, and I think that'll only get more apparent as the season progresses.
Yes, we talked about stashes at wide receiver. He's another person who hasn't really broken out yet, but go out there and stash. So, stash wide receivers for the week: Josh Downs and Jalen Tolbert.
I like that. Let's talk about another high drafted wide receiver that's banged up. Stay in the NFC East and go to the Eagles Saints. I know we're jumping all around according to when they play. That's another early window game. But do I pick up Covey if AJ Brown doesn't go? How many targets that man get?
Too many is the answer. And what is his average depth of target? Probably -2 yards, if we're being honest. At least it seemed like it. They ran a wide receiver screen to Britton Covey more times than I could count on 2 hands, I feel like. But it didn't really turn into a whole lot either. I still think your better chance of finding where the production's going to go is Dallas Goedert. But I mean, he's already owned places. People are probably playing him. His upside's still limited too. The biggest jump is probably going to see they're still going to keep feeding Saquon Barkley, Devontae Smith, who got a touchdown. He's going to keep getting his targets. Everywhere else, like I would not trust that Britton Covey's going to get enough to, be a fantasy relevant play. It's not there.
Yeah, I definitely think I was being a little facetious when I said that. But just in case you were curious of his stat line, after not seeing a single target in week 1. He had 6 catches for 6 targets, or on 6 targets, so he was 100% catch radius for 23 yards, 8.3 fantasy points, and a long of 9 yards. So, like you mentioned, didn't do much with his opportunity there. He's not one of those stash and play kind of guys. But George, I got to give you your opportunity to talk about the Saints. I know I said you weren't going to let you ride it, but this team's been bowling out through 2 weeks, 40 burgers both weeks. And it hasn't, like, I mean, Alvin Kamara went off last week, but even like their top guys, like Chris Olave, pretty mid to start the season as terms of fantasy wide receiver. Rashid Shaheed balling out. What are your thoughts on the Saints?
If you would have told me the Saints were 2-0, absolutely obliterated both teams, and Chris Olave had, 2 catches and 4 catches, I would have called you nuts. But we've had rewind the tape on Alvin Kamara. He's been absolutely insane. 4 touchdowns last week. Sorry, he had 1 receiving to go with his 3 rushing. And I'm sure there's going to be some slowing down on the Alvin Kamara market, and Chris Olave is going to start, becoming more relevant again. But like this team, it looks like Derek Carr's healthy. It looks like they're very well coached. They have plenty of weapons. Maybe we were sleeping on Rashid Shaheed a little bit as much as we did like him, but he has his role. He's a deep threat. He's going to disappear sometimes, but he's somebody who, if you're ever in a pinch, if he keeps being relevant most weeks, you can probably put out there as a high variance flex option and hope, essentially. He's not somebody I would recommend most weeks, but especially against an Eagles defense that's been struggling, if you're desperate with, wide receiver injuries or flex injuries, he's somebody you can at least consider.
Yeah, I think Rashid Shaheed is definitely up there. I believe he's wide receiver 7 on the season, but he's that big play guy. Like if he gets his big play, and they've got it in the last 2 weeks, but there's definitely some concerns there. I did want to give this out because we're talking about it. Andrew was mentioned that he was listening to the New Heights podcast, which is a great podcast. You should probably listen to them. But it's actually pronounced. You hit that because I can't. Kamara, yeah, that's what I thought. And we say Kamara. And guess what? I'm going to keep saying Kamara because I don't pronounce half the names right.
I mean, that on top of it, like, you know how much we still say A-Chain instead of A-Chan? Like, it's tough when it comes to that, especially when it's something we've been saying for a while. And I know A-Chan did it earlier in his career. He was still a rookie when we figured it out, but that's something that's going to be hard to change. I'll try my best to Kamara, but I'm still going to say Kamara way too many times.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. But thank you for pointing that one out. Loved to hear it. So let's move on to we're still talking Ravens. So let's say this. I don't know if you saw this chat that just came in. Captain Joe King, again, thanks for checking out the show. Thanks for being a sub. Appreciate it. He had a trade and he's looking for our advice. He traded Xavier Worthy and Flowers. I'm assuming Zay Flowers. For Brock Bowers because he thinks it's bold. There's a new king in town in Brock Bowers, and he finishes as tight end 1. So on the surface, I'm like, that is bold. But I want to get your thoughts.
I also say that is bold, but the least bold thing he said in that entire thing, at least from how the first 2 weeks have played out, is that there's a legitimate chance that Brock Bowers can be tight end 1 this year. He's looked pretty good, and all the other tight ends have looked very bad. And that just puts up right there where it's like Bowers has a clear path to have a chance to be tight end 1 this year.
No, you're not wrong. He's seen 8 targets in week 1, 9 targets last week. That was a 9-for-9 game for almost 100 yards. Still hasn't found the end zone as a rookie, but has put double-digit fantasy points up for both weeks at tight end, which is definitely, we talk about it. Sometimes it's about being better on the margins when it comes to those specific positions like tight end and quarterback. So to be able to, get a guy that's consistent, if you can get a guy that's going to consistently put up double digits, that should be a good performance. Would I have traded Xavier Worthy and Zay Flowers for a tight end? That's where it kind of gets to me. But in fairness, it's kind of Zay Flowers for Brock Bowers, and you're throwing in Xavier Worthy because he's the big play, deep kind of guy. It's not like that's 2 consistent ones. And unfortunately, I don't know the rest of your team too. Maybe Zay Flowers was your wide receiver 4 kind of ordeal, and you were able to swing that. So I like it though, and I think that's an important thing to remember is fantasy football at the end of the day is about having fun and being bold with your takes, being bold with your beliefs, and go ahead and be different. Go ahead and be against the status quo. Yeah, so what if I wouldn't have hit accept? It might work out for him, and it might work out great, and he might end up being tight end one and getting the best deal of the trade. How many times in our league of record have we been like, why did that trade go through? Why did that person? I've been on the receiving end of this. What I can't believe he's won the championship in week 13 or week 10 because of this trade. And then at the end of the season, look back on that trade and be like, did that trade even help him?
Most of the time, it didn't.
Exactly. So I love
It's
it. Go
very
out there and
true.
make trades. I love when trades happen in fantasy football. I love commenting on them, and I love seeing new ideas. And maybe I should made me realize, you know what? Maybe I should take a better look at Brock Bowers and see if I can get him for something in one of my leagues.
I like it a lot too. I want to move us through to the end of the 1 o'clock window here. Packers and Titans, because we talked about how scared we were of Jordan Love missing significant time when the injury happened in Brazil. Missed 1 week. All of a sudden, week 3 comes around. Jordan Love practicing limited. Chance he plays again. Cody, what do you got?
So Jordan Love did practice limited on Wednesday and Thursday in pads. So it is, and it's been
He can practice
talked about.
twice in pads.
They didn't practice Wednesday in pads.
Oh, okay. Got that. I just misunderstood. He said it. Okay, we're good.
No, they. I mean, I think technically you can, but you only practice in pads so many times throughout the season. So most teams spread it out once a week. But Jordan Love did practice twice. I still don't think he's going to play. I think they're going to save him 1 more week. If they started out 0-2, maybe, and I still don't think then this Titans team is not very good, especially on the offensive side of the ball. Like they got Calvin Ridley who can make plays. You saw it on that touchdown catch, but they also got Will Levis who's going to turn the ball over. I do think the Packers can be runned on, so I wonder if they kind of take a page out of the Packers approach last week against the Colts and just run it because they can be ran on. And I think this game is going to be awfully low scoring. I think I saw the Titans are actually favorites too. I think that tells you where Vegas thinks they are. They're 2.5-point favorites with a 36.5-point over under. So low scoring game. I don't love the fantasy options there in either game. And I think Jordan Love misses 1 more week, which probably bodes well for Titans fans. But heck, I would love to see him out there because I think that would give us a real shot. Because the one thing the Titans are really good at is stopping the run, especially on the inside with Tavondre Sweat and Jeffrey Simmons and having Malik Willis back there. Although the revenge game would be fun, I think it'll be a tough game.
I don't know. I'm saying give me Tony Pollard, give me Josh Jacobs, give me the under on any time of game bet that you can find out there. 1.5 hours, sure. Yeah. Every single play is gonna be a run. Especially if Malik Willis plays. This game's gonna be done so fast that you'll be able to watch the 4th quarter of your favorite 1 o'clock game after you're done with that game, Cody.
That happened last week.
And it's gonna happen again.
The Colts actually slowed the game down, but we were 4 minutes left in the 3rd quarter, and every other game just went to the 4th. But then the Colts started picking it back up, so some of those games went through it quick. But yeah, I think this will be a good game. I'm with you. I think Jaden Reed could still be flexible because they still get him involved with the quick pass game, and he has that big play breakability to make some references. But outside of that, and I think you're throwing Calvin Ridley out there and hoping he just go makes a play on the ball. But I'm really interested to see how they change, because let's not make a mistake. Brian Callahan, I think that's his name. He has not been quiet about how disappointed he's been in with his quarterback and offensive play. He did regret some of the comments he made on the sidelines that the cameras picked up towards him after the second, I don't even want to know, turnover of the season by Will Levis. But yeah, they haven't been good. Can they rely on the run game, or because this is passing in his blood and they have those DeAndre Hopkins coming back from injury, Tyler Boyd, Calvin Ridley, Chigo Conquo, like, are they still going to want to throw it around? I'm really interested in this game, and I think it'll be a better game if Jordan Love doesn't play, like in terms of closeness. Jordan Love does play, might be a slow first half, but I think the Packers would pull away in the second half.
Before we get out of this game, play a little set my lineup in the Couch GM's World Cup. Jaden Reed in a bad matchup, let's say with Malik Willis or Michael Pittman.
Oh, I play Jaden Reed.
Okay, that's what I was thinking too. But interesting when you look at their draft positions and just how they performed through the first few weeks. Any other games before we get to this primetime games you want to touch on?
No, I'll just give some like quick highlights. Just so there's actually one I want to talk about. So last one, the 1 o'clock game, we didn't talk about Broncos Bucks. Reason we didn't talk about it, but shout out to Baker through 2 weeks being fantasy quarterback
Mhm.
#1 and still pretty much unowned in fantasy football. Could be a good week to stream if you need it. Panthers Raiders. Andy Dalton's going to start. I asked Marcus this: would you play Deontay Johnson? He said yes if you needed him. Okay, don't feel great about it. Raiders probably a lock in most people's survivor leagues, even though the thing is changing. But the game I did want to talk
Wide
about.
receiver number 3, by the way, Deontay Johnson. Put him on your bench, see if it helps. If it doesn't, you drop him.
Yep, he might not be available because he might still have been drafted high enough, but maybe
He
he
was
was
he was
cut.
available in some of my leagues, not all.
So keep an eye out on there. But the Dolphins Seahawks game, and the
Mhm.
thing that I really want to talk about is the Dolphins. They had the playmakers when Tua was healthy, and he was placed on IR with a concussion, so he'll be out the next 4 weeks. What does that mean for Tyreek Hill? What does that mean for Jalen Waddle? What does that mean for Devon Achane?
I'm not as worried about Achan. Um, I mean, he's shown he's so talented, and he doesn't necessarily need the quarterback to get him the ball. Obviously, you'd like to have a passing game around him, so they're not stacking the box as much against him. But it's still hard for teams to stack the box, no matter who the quarterback is, when you have Hill and Waddle running streaks on the outside. Um, so I'm not worried about Achan. But when it comes to a quarterback getting the ball to Hill and Waddle, I'm very concerned. Waddle has become essentially benched for me until I see kind of how this goes, because obviously he's the lower upside of the two. Tyreek Hill, as soon as you bench him, he's going to go off for 110 and 2 touchdowns. And he's somebody who I think is good enough to raise elevate the play of a quarterback around him. So he's somebody like a Justin Jefferson. You don't care who his quarterback is, you're playing him. It's going to be a lot more high variance than we hoped, especially when you drafted him probably in the top 3 or 4 picks of your fantasy draft. But he's still going to have his big games.
Yeah, Hill is still in my lineup, no question, but it might affect how I play the rest of my lineup. I might have to play a safer flex. I might have to not take a flyer on a running back or something like that, and
Yeah.
try to just to make sure I get a solid floor of points if he does bust over the next couple of weeks. And hoping all the best to Tua. But I think we're in lockstep there. Waddle, I think you could still play him if you need to, but if you had other options, I would look into it. I'd still play him over like Michael Pittman since you just asked about him just
Fair.
because of the matchup and his big playability. But that's kind of the tier he is at now after week 1 and the first half of week 2 where he looked like he could be a star uh, this season. And then I think game of the week, Lions Cardinals, 4 o'clock. Lions coming off a tough loss. Did cause Dan Campbell to have to sell his home, which is a crazy thing that that story broke on A to Z Sports, and he was talking about it how there was they found out where he lived, and like, Lions, man, this is the best you've been in 60 years. Like, what are you doing? So I don't want to talk too much about that because just saw that as we started to go live, and I want to get more details before I speak too much. But that's an interesting story if you want to look it up on Twitter, X, or wherever you get your sports news. But I think all people were play here: Marvin Harrison, James Conner, Kyler Murray, Jared Goff, both Lions running backs. Amon St. Brown, I know he did get banged up, but he's still practicing. So I did like that. I think he'll be good to go. And Jameson Williams, he continues to look good.
Jameson Williams has been one of the bigger surprises, so I'm glad you mentioned him. He was somebody I was going to if you didn't.
All right, Sunday Night Football. How about them Chiefs versus the Falcons? George hates me so much for that. And he knows I love how much I know how much he hates me for that. But
Cody
Chiefs
is the best
Falcons,
person in the world at pushing my buttons.
put that on my tombstone. But
Yes.
Chiefs Falcons, big question. How are you handling the Isaiah Pacheco injury?
I won't lie to you. I didn't put high waiver priority on any of the Chiefs backs because it's very hard to tell where to go, especially now seeing that Kareem Hunt was re-signed. I think it's going to be a super ugly split. to the point where none of them are going to be super relevant. I think honestly, if I had a favorite right now, it would be they might not have as much ball control. They're going to have to pass the ball a little bit more. I like P. Ryan.
Interesting. You're the first person to say P. Ryan that I've talked to who they like more. A lot of
And
it has been
I think it's partly because also you've seen the success McKinnon's had in short stretches there and that kind of thing. They like using a pass catching back, and maybe it's never something that really sticks around forever. But as they're filling in this time for the Pacheco injury, I wouldn't be shocked if they run a lot more screen passes to make up for the lack of the run game and have P. Ryan be involved.
Yeah, I think that's a good point as well. And P. Ryan, he's still available out there. Obviously, Carson Steele was the guy that was picked up the most, the most sought after. I saw on Twitter, which I love seeing these two. So if you ever get one of these or you want to share them, someone posted that in their league, uh, they got Carson Steele for $83 of their $100 fab, and the next closest bid was $7. Like how much does that
Oh,
make your stomach turn when you overspend by that amount of money? So that's the
for
fun part
his
about playing
sake
foul,
too,
though.
I hope he plays well. But then I also worry about where you're going to be in week 10 when Pacheco's starting to ramp up to come back. And then you're going to be sitting there in the fantasy playoffs, and your big waiver wire spend is somebody who's, if all goes well, not going to be relevant in the fantasy playoffs.
Speaking of fab, just fun, quick question I had there. Has there been anyone that you've spent a ton of fab on? Are you still saving most of there's been so many injuries. I feel like fab spending would have been at an all-time high, but I actually feel like it's pretty low this year because there hasn't been a true guy available to come in and quote unquote save a season.
Yeah, mine's been pretty low. I mean, in the Couch Gyms World Cup, I'm still sitting at 96 out of my 100 fab. If I'm remembering correctly, I spent a full $4 on man, I'm forgetting exactly who it was even. That's pretty bad. Might have even been a defense at this point, a streaming defense. Like there's nothing that's really popped out to me like this is an obvious game changer. Obviously, there's probably a lot of people that did that on Jordan Mason, and that makes sense. I actually stashed Jordan Mason as a CMC owner before the week started in week 1. So I got away without having to spend fab on that. But I think he's the only person so far that, if you look at it, has been worth spending that fab, let alone people actually spending it.
That's a good point. But anything else, Chief Falcons? I glad to see the Falcons came back and won. Now I know you weren't, but makes me
No,
feel better
but
about picking them. And what though I will say about that game, I was happy to see improvement from Kirk Cousins' mobility, and he started to look more comfortable because that was a big concern after week 1, and he started to look up here. And then Andrew just dropped in the chat that he saw somebody spend $25 on Quentin Johnson chasing those 2 touchdowns this past week. So at
and I
least
still
that's
like
only a
Lad
quarter.
McConkey better.
I mean, Quentin Johnson has played well.
Yeah.
So, but I understand why you like the lad McConkey. That's a real nice lad there. But we got Monday night before we talk about Thursday night, go completely backwards. But Monday Night Football, week 3 doubleheader. Honestly, when we got through week 2 and there wasn't a doubleheader, I was like, oh, maybe we're not doing this year because I can't stand them, especially when they're only stacked 45 minutes apart
Yep.
and there's no red zone or anything like that. And I have to physically manually go back and forth between those 2 games. But the 2 games are Jaguars versus the Bills and Commanders versus the Bengals. And I feel like both games will be pretty one-sided.
If you have Sunday Ticket, will they let you split ESPN and ABC on a split screen?
Not if you have YouTube TV, I think you could put it in a multi-viewer.
Okay.
Like if
So
you have
there's that.
actual YouTube TV and not just the Sunday Ticket version. I believe. Don't have
Okay.
that. So I can't confirm, and they're definitely not a sponsor because I don't have that.
Got it. Okay. But Jags Bills, Evan Ingram up in the air. I think we did talk a little bit about Brian Thomas already and how we like his upside there. Christian Kirk has been one of the biggest, duds of the season. And I mean, not that people took him super high, but everywhere that I saw him taken, he was right around your flex or wide receiver 3. So it's someone who is relevant enough on your team that like it hurts a little bit if he's not been performing for you. So on top of the Jags just not being great, you're also looking at their top weapon not being great. Brian Thomas has kind of had to pick up the slack, and he's more of a big play threat. Like, there's just not a lot on that Jaguars offense to like that's not ETN.
Yeah. And, we talked about it. I think, especially if you go into your Monday night game and you have the ability to pick up players that have played on your bench. I know some leagues don't, but if you don't, maybe pick up Tank Bigsby to get a little bit ahead of it. Not saying we're going to ever root for injuries or hope that's going to happen, but he's seen a pretty decent split already to start the season. And he's not that he's, startable, but get ahead of that fab spending for a guy if ETN went down, because ETN has been so much of their offense. And maybe that starts to change this week. I feel like they're, a little bit away, but they got to find ways to get Christian Kirk involved. And I think, ironically, on the other end, the Bills were expecting to win this game pretty easily, but it's still pretty much just Josh Allen and nobody. Like, I think you play Dalton Kincaid because you need a tight end, and James Cook. I'm talking about pass catchers. James Cook, he's in there. But like, is there any wide receivers you're playing on Monday night for the Bills?
I think in our league of record, I have some flex problems, being down AJ Brown and the fact that Tank Dell has been struggling. My current flex plays
You
are
going
both
Khalil
on Monday
Shakur?
night. It's Khalil Shakur and Brian Thomas are my current flex plays.
Well, that's Brian Thomas for sure.
Yeah, well, no, it's both. Two flex.
It's both.
Playing both.
I'm sorry, buddy.
Yeah, it's a great time. I mean, other bench options, Ty Chandler as a handcuff. Gus Edwards has been a second fiddle. Zach Moss, who we'll talk about in a second.
Also, could be
Dell.
a Monday night one, though.
It could be yeah, I mean, I have time to make that decision if I want to go Zach Moss over Khalil Shakur. But, I mean, if you look at it, Khalil Shakur has been the best of the Bills wide receivers, and it still hasn't been good.
Yeah, I think that with that news, and we can transition to the Bengals game right after this, but for me, I feel like the upside to score a touchdown is higher with Shakur than Zach Moss. I will admit that for anyone listening, I am still a Chase Brown is better than Zach Moss guy. I know they haven't done that split, but I think it's coming. And maybe that's just me, my preconceived notion, just willing that. But I do think Khalil Shakur has a better chance of scoring a touchdown. Commanders versus Bengals.
Hold on a second. Before we go, fun question about the Jags. Does Dougie P make it to the Eagles Monday night game in Philly to celebrate his homecoming? I will try to find the week of that really quick.
Okay. I'm very confused by this question.
November 3rd. That would be 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Week 8.
So they play each other, and
they play each other in Philly in week 8.
And does Dougie P get
Doug Peterson get fired before week 8 game?
Absolutely not. Week 9.
Week 9. My bad. There's a bye week in there.
Either way, Sunday night.
That's even worse. Okay.
So
I'm going to say yes, but not much further.
I think he makes it throughout this. I think they're going to turn around. I do. I think he makes it through the end of the season.
For their case.
I definitely think he makes it to the end of the season. I honestly wouldn't be surprised. And I know I don't want to, we're already going long here, so I don't want to spend too much time on it. I wouldn't be surprised if Dougie P makes it through a GM. And Trent Baalke gets let go before Dougie P.
Okay.
But we can talk about that all offseason or when that happens next week, and you all just play this clip back. But Commanders, Bengals, real quick. Like, the Commanders, they can't score touchdowns. They can win games. They can't score touchdowns. The Bengals are struggling. But T. Higgins returned to practice. So I don't have too much to say other than that. Like, I'm, as a Terry McLaurin owner, I'm scared. But Marcus tells me, and he knows more about the Commanders than anyone, to hang on. And that's a buy low candidate. So just want to share that information again, but that could be some homerism in that as well.
Yeah, I'll leave it there and we can move on to our next segment.
Sweet. But before we do the Thursday night game, did get one last, maybe not the last, but a fan question here. And I'm going to ask for some context if they're still listening and dropping in. But would you drop Hunter Henry or Kyle Pitts if you had to? And I would be like, for who? If you need to play somebody, yeah, I don't think you need 2 tight ends. I'm going to say drop Hunter Henry. I think George would probably say drop Kyle Pitts based on our conversations. And if you have both and you need someone, absolutely. But if you're still there, drop us a comment on who you're dropping them for. But I think, yeah, definitely, I'm not a big believer in having multiple tight ends on my roster to begin with.
Mhm.
I understand you're kind of in the Hunter Henry, Kyle Pitts. They're kind of that same tier of middling week by week players. They're not your lock and load, and they have no defense. Well, then you're going to have to pick up somebody for a defense, and I would pick up Hunter Henry, or I would drop Hunter Henry and pick up a defense like the Chargers this week, or even the Raiders. Probably somebody is available, but those would be one of my streaming options.
I agree with that. I would drop Hunter Henry instead of Kyle Pitts just because Kyle Pitts does have the more upside. But I do want to say going into Thursday night, I do like Hunter Henry as a potential bucket candidate because there's so many tight ends that are banged up and he's gotten some targets.
Yeah, I mean the Patriots are another team that can't score as well, but you're right. He did get peppered with targets last week, so I guess
Our expectations for tight ends are low. So let's just go with that. We're playing Hunter Henry in the hopes that he gets those 8 targets again and can turn it into 8 points.
Or finds the end zone.
Or find the end zone. Exactly.
I mean, that's the thing with there. So let me just ask you this. The Jets defense is good, which I think plays a factor into this. But now I'm just thinking out loud. Would you play Hunter Henry tonight so then you don't have to worry about what Kyle Pitts does and just drop him for the defense this week? Because if you don't play Hunter Henry tonight, I feel like you have to drop him after the game to pick up your defense. Then if you want him back, you just drop the defense next week. You might have to pay a little bit of fab, but that might be the way to do it. If you're worried about losing both, wait till after the game, drop Hunter Henry. If he goes off again, pick him back up next week through the waiver wire or fab process.
That's what I would do. Drop Hunter Henry, and you can probably even drop him now before the game starts because a lot of times they go to a waiver and then they'll lock when their game starts. So you still have to wait till next week to add him anyway. And then try to get him back next week if he does happen to go off. I think there's a better chance of if you drop Kyle Pitts and he goes off, people are going to be all over it, as opposed to if you drop Hunter Henry and he goes off, there'll probably be some interest, but not as much as Kyle Pitts.
I agree with that. I think Hunter Henry's available in our league of record and no one's picked him up through 2 weeks. If Kyle Pitts got dropped, I'd pick him up next week for sure. So I really appreciate that insight. So let's circle all the way back to Thursday night preview, which kicks off in less than an hour, which is why we're doing the live shows so we can talk about that game, do a little bit of preview. If you're listening to the podcast now, stick around and listen, maybe comment on some of our thoughts and see how wrong or right we were. But if you want to end the show now, I completely understand because this information goes mute once the game kicks off. Over under 38.5 points. Jets are favored by 6.5. I did see NFL.com. Everybody picked the Jets. So Freezing Cold Takes is ready with that screenshot. My question, though, is the Patriots have looked better than I anticipated them to. I thought they beat the Bengals. They were in it to overtime versus the Seahawks. And the Jets have struggled. They looked really off week 1. They got a win against the Titans team in week 2. My concern is Garrett Wilson. 60 yards in week 1, 57 yards in week 2, no touchdowns. Hasn't been a feature point yet to the offense. It's running a lot through the running backs so far. What's your panic level on Garrett Wilson?
Fairly low. And the only reason I say that is I think we're still seeing Aaron Rodgers' ramp up process. We talked so much about Kirk Cousins needing to go through the ramp up process, and he had a bad week 1 and then a better week 2. Rodgers is dealing with the same thing, even though he's got 2 months on him. So Garrett Wilson's too talented to be held down the entire season. The fact that you're saying he had his 60 yards and 57 yards, he's actually been more involved than some of these top end wide receivers have that we drafted with all these expectations. And Wilson actually technically has more of an excuse, being as Rodgers should get better as the season goes on, as opposed to some of these other guys are playing with Amon with Jared Goff, and he's just been struggling, for example. So I'm not worried about Garrett Wilson. Obviously, you're worried if you're going to have to wait and just hope he ramps up in time for the fantasy playoffs and try to get to there if he's not playing at his best. But I'm not overreacting and benching him as of now, and I'm definitely not dropping him off my roster.
Yeah, I think definitely not dropping him off the roster. Real quick, checking out the inactives that came out. Nobody of note on the offensive side in terms of fantasy. The Jets will be without CJ Mosley on the defensive side, so could help with the running games. But Quincy Williams has started to take over as the top tackling machine there, and Mosley's kind of been like the Bobby Wagner leader of the defense. And then it looks like on the Patriots side, two names to look at is their linebacker as well, Juwan Bentley is a little banged up, and then they've had some offensive line depth, which is the one I was most interested in. Looks like only one guy's going to miss. They had 3 people not practicing on their starting offensive line earlier in the week, so but only one is inactive, so should be good. The Jets are missing Jermaine Johnson because he tore his Achilles, unfortunately, and then they still have no Hassan Reddick because of that whole trade fiasco. So not a lot of great pass rush on the outside. They still have Quentin Williams on the inside. But Jets looking to overcome the Patriots. Not something we've talked about a lot here, but I think they're, like I mentioned, everyone at NFL.com is picking the Jets. I think I would too.
I would too. And since I came prepared this week with my score prediction, because you didn't just throw it at me like you did the last time we did a live show before a game, I've got Jets comfortably 24-13. Hoping that touchdown for the Patriots goes to Hunter Henry at this point. And yeah.
All right. So one last fantasy question. I do want to ask Braylon Allen, kind of a hot name on waiver wires. He's definitely the Breece Hall handcuff. So I think you want him on your roster, especially if we've seen some injuries. We saw Breece Hall get banged up. He came back in, but we saw him get banged up. And then Allen came in and scored 2 touchdowns. Are you playing Braylon? Are they now a David Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs, where you feel comfortable playing both? Or is it still Breece Hall and you need to see another week or two of Braylon before he's in your lineup?
It's still just Breece Hall for me. Because I think at this point, the only way you're going to see enough Braylon Allen to be a slam dunk play is if either Hall leaves the game for a period again because of the injury, or if they get up big enough that, they're trying to save Hall and give him more touches to the rookie. So I don't see them getting up big enough for him to get enough work, maybe a little bit in the fourth quarter if they are up that 2 scores, like I said. But I don't trust it yet to say he can be a 1-2 punch.
Yeah, I kind of with you. I do see that Aaron Rodgers said on Pat McAfee this past week that both of them were explosive, both of them are playmakers, and both of them are going to be involved. So it's definitely something to monitor as this, especially coming off the 10 days rest. So I'm not saying this week, but I think starting next week, especially as we go through bye weeks and injuries, that might be a specific player that, could spot start in a pinch, even with Breece Hall. And shout out to him being one of the youngest players ever to score a touchdown. So that's a pretty cool stat as well. George, anything else on this edition of the Couch GMs podcast?
No, I'm glad to be back, and glad Marcus was able to fill in for me. Beginning of this week, and looking forward to Thursday night and the week 3 slate.
Me too, George. I'm looking forward to the Thursday night game. Looking forward to this slate getting started. I'm glad to have you back. He was getting married, and we're going to celebrate, have a lot of fun, just like we're having a lot of fun doing this podcast twice a week, Mondays and Thursdays, live at 6:30 on Facebook and YouTube. Make sure you check it. Still out in all your podcast platforms later that night or the next morning. And you can follow us on social media at Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, X, TikTok, all those great places. A lot of great content coming your way. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on Monday.